And we're going to continue with Fire on the Mountain from the Golden Harp from the Grey King. And that's what's happened. There's fire on the mountain. Run, boys, run. Will and Bran got the fire brooms, called the fire department. They've just come down to where the fire engines are. And Caradog Pritchard is there with his gun and blood on his shirt. We cut off in the last video during what Caradog was saying, so we'll back up to the beginning of that. Bring me the dog! Bring him! I will prove to you that it was him. Him and that freakish white hound of the freak boy Davies. I will show you. 6 sheep in my field. There are 6 of them, and their throats ripped out. Damn, oh, their heads half off, all for black joy. And that is what those bloody dogs had of it, and that is what I shall shoot them for. Bring me them here. Bring them, and I will prove it to you. The boys stood frozen, gazing at him in horror. He was not, for that moment, a human being, but a frenzied creature possessed by rage, turned into an animal. All that could be seen of him was the urge to hunt, and it was, as it always will be, the most dreadful sight in the world. Looking at Pritchard with the eye of a human and the vision of an old one, Will was filled with an overpowering compassion, an awareness of what must inevitably overtake Caradog Pritchard if he were not checked now, for always in this passion before it was too late. Stop, he called to him, stop before the Grey King sees you and puts out his hand in friendship, and you, unwitting, take it and are not destroyed. Before he thought what he was doing, he stepped forward, and the moment brought the red-haired man, swinging toward him, the finger wheeled viciously round, jabbing at him through the air. You there too, Saesbach. You are part of it, and your uncle's farm. They are clewed dogs, these murdering brutes. It is on your heads, and I will have my due from all of you. From all of you. Spittle foamed at the corners of his mouth. There was no speaking to him. Will fell back, and with the fury of Pritchard shouting, even the firefighters paused in amazement. There was no sound but the thump of the fire engines pumping, and the crackle of the approaching flames, and no movement for any instant anywhere. No movement for an instant anywhere. Then David Evans pushed forward, a small, brisk form with a fire broom in his hand, and smudges of soot on his face and shirt, and he took Pritchard fearlessly by the shoulder and shook him hard. The fire will be on us in minutes, Caradog Pritchard. Do you want your farm to burn? All of us, here working, our hands raw to keep the flames from your roof, and your wife inside there doing the same, and you standing here shouting your silly head off, and think of nothing but a few dead sheep. A lot more dead sheep you will have, man, and a dead farm too, if you do not pull yourself together now, now! Pritchard gazed blankly at him, the small bright eyes squinting suspiciously in the pudgy face, and then he seemed gradually to wake up and to realize where he was and what was happening. Dazed, he stared at the flames leaping closer beyond the hedge. The pump of the fire engine rose to a higher pitch as the workers swung their hoses round to meet the advancing fire. Sparks flew in all directions as the beaters thwacked frantically at the bracken. Caradog Pritchard gave one short squeal of terror, turned and rushed back toward his farmhouse. Without a word, Will and Bran rejoined the line of beaters, edging diagonally up the hillside in an effort to keep the fire from sweeping over and beyond the crag. The sky was growing darker as the clouds thickened, and the evening drew on, but there was no hint of rain. Again the wind gusted, dropped to nothing, rose to a sudden new gust. There was no telling what it would do next. More and more strongly Will could feel the enmity of the Grey King, thrusting at him from the high peaks at the head of the valley. It made a wall as fierce as the wall of flames roaring toward them from the other direction, though the only one who could feel the force of both, the only one caught between the two, was the old one, Will Stanton, bound by birth to follow this quest wherever it might lead. He was swept up suddenly in a wild exhilaration, bringing energy from nowhere to harden his drooping arms and legs. Yelling with sudden glee, grinning madly at Bran, he whacked at the flames, licking the bracken at his feet, as if he could flatten them in an instant into the ground. Then a flash of movement higher up the mountain caught his eyes, away from the line of flame, and out of the bare rocks above he saw, flinging itself forward at astonishing speed, the form of a gray-white fox, brush flying out behind, ears back. It leapt up the towering side, of Craig Yarden. Smoke billowed, rising on the wind, and the fox was gone. Will had seen it for only a quick second, then he heard a high wail from Bran. "Careful!" Then the Welsh boy was scrambling up the slope. Ignoring cries of concern from below, ignoring the fire and the smoke and all else except the glimpse of the white animal he had thought was his dog. "Bran, come back! It isn't Careful!" Will climbed desperately after him, his heart thumping as if it would leap out of his chest. "Bran, come back!" Steeper and steeper the slope grew until they were upon the crag itself, scrambling through bracken over slippery grass, round jutting shelves of grey rock. Bran paused at last on one of these, panting, staring wildly about him. Will stumbled up beside him, hardly able to speak. "Careful!" Bran shouted into nowhere. "It wasn't Careful, Bran." "Of course it was. I saw him." "It was a fox, Bran. One of the Milgwen. Bran, it's a trick, don't you see?" Will coughed, choking in a billowy gust of smoke from a black cloud that wreathed round the slope behind and below them. They could see nothing but smoke and the steep rock, with patches of grey sky above their heads. Below there was no sign of the farm or men or the valley, and in their ears no sound but the sighing of the wind, and somewhere the harsh, faint voices of birds. Bran looked at Will uncertainly. "Bran, I'm sure of it." "All right, I was so certain. I'm sorry." "Don't be. It wasn't you seeing, it was the Grey King making you see, but the trouble is, we can't go back that way. The fire's coming up after us." "There's a way down on the other side," Bran said, brushing sweat from his eyes. "No bracken for the fire to burn there, just rock, but it's hard going." He looked doubtfully at Will's pale, smudged face. "I'm all right. Go on, go on." They clambered up on the rough stairway of grass and rock, holding on now with both hands and feet. "There's a bird's nest here." Will had glimpsed an untidy pile of twigs and bracken a foot from his head. "There'd be birds, too, if it weren't for the fire. It's a nesting place in spring, I told you. It's just the cormorant. Not just the cormorants, ravens, too, lots of birds, which is why they call it Bird Rock, of course. Here." Bran paused, upright on a broad shelf of rock edged with bracken. "This is the ridge. It goes down the other side toward Pritchard's farm." But Will was standing very still, looking at him. "Bird Rock." "That's right," Bran said, surprised. "Bird Rock. Craig Yarden, Rock of the Birds. I thought you knew that." Will said softly, reflectively, "On the day of the dead, when the year dies too, must the youngest open the oldest hills, through the door of the birds where the breeze breaks." Bran stared at him. "You mean the door of the birds? Here? Bird Rock, it must be. I know it. And this is the day of the dead." Will swung his head sharply, gazing at the sky where the clouds flew like grey puffs of smoke, and the wind's changing. "Feel? No? Yes, there again. A bad wind. A wind from the dark. I don't like it, Bran. It has the Grey King in it." He spoke now with no thought of Bran as anything but an ally, ever. The white-haired boy said bleakly, "It's swinging to the north. That is the worst wind of all, the north wind. Gwent, Tread, Yamaru, they call it. The wind that blows round the feet of the dead. It brings storms, and worse